I renovated my apartment and, as a thank you, they decided to evict me. Hello, everyone. I own a company that provides contractors for weddings and events. Our main focus is photo and video coverage. We also have DJs, drone pilots, makeup artists, hairstylists, and so on. A couple of months ago, a bride contacted us through the live chat on our website. She said they were coming to South Africa in December and needed a wedding photographer and videographer. I sent her our packages, and she said her fiancé wanted to call me. I told her that was fine and gave her my phone number. A few hours passed. I had almost forgotten about them, when my phone finally rang. The groom, with a very strong German accent, started showering me with compliments about how everyone absolutely loved our amazing work and service. I considered every word of it cheap flattery, but at the same time, I'm terrible at saying no to people. In the end, he offered to pay us about a third of the package price, suggested cutting down the hours, skipping printed photos, and so on. He also added that he would tip us 500 Rand, just over $30, on the day of the event. I asked why that couldn't just be included in the quote, and he replied, "Gentleman's agreement." Somehow, I agreed to this insane deal. If I were a drinker, I'd say this was the moment I should stop drinking at work. Important. I made it very clear that there would be no overtime. If my people stayed even 1 minute longer than agreed, I would charge for overtime. He said that was fine. They needed us for 2 hours on Friday and 3 hours on Saturday. Nothing too complicated, so I agreed. But to make this happen, I had to completely reshuffle my team schedule for that weekend to free up 2 qualified employees for their event. On Friday, I shot the wedding myself and brought one of our videographers with me. They were incredibly sweet, especially the groom. Time dragged on because there really wasn't much to shoot, just a group of people sitting at a table. But whatever. After an hour and a half, the groom told us we could leave. Great. On the second evening, I couldn't work myself. I had told them that from the start, so I sent another photographer, honestly much more talented than me, and the same videographer as the day before. The shooting time was from 18:15 to 21:15, but I told them to stay until 21:45 to make up for the time we hadn't worked the first evening. How we operate. None of my employees own their own equipment. Everything belongs to me, so after every shift they are required to return the gear to me. The wedding they were shooting was about a 25-minute drive from my place. The shoot I was working on was about an hour away. I was busy on another job until 10 p.m. I got home after 11 p.m. and saw that they still hadn't returned. All the other teams started coming back shortly after me and returning their equipment. But those 2 were nowhere to be found. That worried me, because they were working the closest location and should have finished earlier than everyone else. I tried calling them, but neither of them answered. Around midnight, I got into my car and went looking for them. About 10 minutes into the drive, I saw them pass me in the opposite direction. I turned around and went home. I asked, what happened? They explained that they stayed until 21:45 as instructed. But just as they were about to start packing up, the bride sent a bridesmaid to ask them to stay for another hour. They told her clearly that I would have to approve it, and that I would add it to the invoice later. On top of that, they made my videographer do things that are only included in our most expensive package. But more importantly, according to my employees, the couple behaved horribly at the second event. They yelled at my photographer and were rude in general. I have a very low tolerance for rude people. I renovated my rental apartment and got evicted as a thank you. I became a tenant for the first time in my early 30s. Pretty late. Before that, I'd always been on the other side of the barricades. I'm a landlord and a contractor. I know that doesn't earn me much sympathy here, but in my defense, everything I own, I built with my own hands. At least in the early years during university, I worked as a painter, finisher, carpenter, and joiner. After graduating, I'd saved enough to take on some truly brutal, high-interest debt that I then spent years digging myself out of. I bought a dangerous, abandoned warehouse that eventually became my first home. I converted it into a 4-unit building and lived there for the next 10 years, while also starting to build new rental properties from scratch. Right before COVID, I sold that very first building, and the buyer wanted me out, so they could raise the rent to market rate. That was my first eviction, but the inconvenience was softened by the decent payout I got during the insane market boom. Also, living as a tenant in a building you built and owned for years felt awkward. So I decided to treat myself and rent a condo downtown, a massive upgrade from my old one-bedroom that I'd chosen purely for ROI, not for actually living in comfort. I spent about 3 months viewing dozens of places and got a pretty good sense of the rental market. My pride wouldn't let me settle for just anything. I had to get the best possible deal. I quickly realized that the market that had once treated me so kindly as a landlord was absolute hell as a tenant. Then I got insanely lucky. I took a risk on a condo listing on Craigslist with 0 photos, usually a terrible sign. Turned out the lack of photos wasn't hiding anything. The owner just didn't know how to use a digital camera. He didn't even own a smartphone. The place itself was perfect. Built around 2005, floor-to-ceiling windows, high floor with a panoramic view, AC, open floor plan, reasonable rent. The only problem was the kitchen and bathrooms straight out of the early 2000s, and the reddest cherry floors you can imagine. Hideous, cheap faux veneer cabinets in honey color, glossy black appliances, brushed aluminum everywhere, and a ton of frosted glass light fixtures. The landlord came across as very hands-off. In my offer, I wrote that if he was okay with it, I'd handle all maintenance myself and just transfer the rent to his account every month without bothering him. He loved that idea. He said he'd bought a house in the suburbs and wanted to keep this condo as a rental asset for about 10 years until retirement. Where I live, tenant protections are pretty strong, and unless he decided to sell, he wouldn't be able to evict me without cause. We signed the lease. I paid the deposit and moved in. The last time I saw him was at move-in. He said, "If you take good care of the place, I promise you can live here as long as you want." Firm, confident, boomer-style handshake, like at a job interview. And he disappeared. We absolutely love the new place. Total opposite of the up-and-coming neighborhood we'd just left, now 120 meters above the street. The awful kitchen, bathrooms, and floors haunted me. But I had a plan. It was just a matter of time. One of my carpentry subcontractors did retail interiors, showrooms, and model apartments for big developers. When you build a 30-story tower, you often spend hundreds of thousands to millions creating a sales model unit. Once all the apartments are sold, all that stuff either gets trashed or dumped on Craigslist. When I was building small multi-unit buildings, I used to buy barely used appliances I pulled up the floors in a single morning, labeled every piece, packed them, and stacked everything in order. The subcontractor came over and installed the new kitchen in 2 days while I was laying the new flooring. The floor itself took me a full week. I had to haul the boards to my warehouse on the other side of the city just to cut the ends there. During lockdown, with everyone stuck at home, making noise with a miter saw in the apartment wasn't an option. In less than 2 weeks, I basically had a brand new luxury condo for about $12,000 out of my own pocket. I'm sure at this point, every reader is clutching their head thinking, what the hell am I proud of? Renovating someone else's apartment with my own money. But at the time, it made sense. I was convinced I'd be living there for at least 10 years. Plus, when I moved in, I was paying about $500 below market rent. And in its new condition, it was more like $1,000 below market. There are situations in the real estate market where renting makes more sense than buying. For example, my monthly rent wouldn't even cover the interest on a mortgage, let alone utilities, insurance, taxes, and the opportunity cost of freezing a down payment. In other words, renting the condo was cheaper than renting money from the bank to buy it. And for a developer, cash is a tool. The more of it you have on hand, the more you can build. With a 1-year lease and tons of free time, this didn't feel like a crazy decision. I mean, who's going to say no to a $2,000 kitchen faucet? Pouring yourself a glass of water from it felt like racking the slide on a perfectly oiled rifle. Holland and Holland. Worst case scenario, I figured I could recoup most of the money just by reselling the appliances if things went south, which is exactly what ended up happening. I went into this fully aware of the risks of investing time and money into a place I didn't own. But I missed one crucial variable: the landlord's wife. By spring 2023, by my math, the upgrade had already paid for itself, nearly 36 months of use. I hadn't seen the landlord once since moving in, and he hadn't contacted me after approving the renovation, aside from the monthly rent received confirmation. So naturally, I started to worry when, by the end of the first week of May, the rent still hadn't been withdrawn. 2 emails went unanswered until there was a knock at the door. I opened it and was hit by a wave of floral perfume that matched perfectly with a wall of colorful fabric and a pair of red heels in my doorway. Turns out the landlord had caught COVID in 2023, for fuck's sake, and sent his wife to pick up the rent. I pulled out my phone to cancel the transfer and went to my office for the checkbook. When I came back, she was still standing in the middle of the living room, spinning in place like a top. "Oh my God, this place is gorgeous. I heard you did some renovations, but I didn't expect this. Is that a Sub-Zero fridge?" She opened the fridge. My fridge. "I love these floors and these cabinets, and are they custom?" She turned the kitchen faucet on and off about 6 times. After she left, it took days to air out the perfume. A few hours later, my wife came home, and judging by the lingering scent, I'd already told her who had been over. You could practically smell the dollar signs forming behind her eyes. Of course, 3 weeks later, a realtor calls, asking to bring a photographer to shoot the unit. The landlords are selling the condo. The landlord himself, now recovered from COVID, stopped responding to my calls and emails entirely. I was furious that he couldn't even be honest with me. My wife was furious because she didn't want to move, and I was just ashamed that I'd believed that asshole. We didn't lose much in pure numbers. Over 3 years, we paid tens of thousands less than market rent. Still, it stung. Even in a slow market, the condo sold in 3 weeks. And yes, the new owners planned to move in themselves. They sent the legally required 3 months' notice and paid the 1-month rent compensation. In the listing, I noticed the line: luxuriously renovated with premium appliances, cabinetry, and built-ins. No expense spared. My first instinct was to message the realtor and suggest double-checking exactly what was included with the unit and what was actually being sold. But the wording pissed my wife off so much that we decided to let them do their own due diligence. I'm guessing you can already see where this is going. This time, it only took me 3 days to remove the new kitchen and reinstall the old one. Same with the floors. Turns out you can lay about 93 millibars of flooring in roughly 2 hours if everything is pre-labeled and pre-cut. One section of the old tongue and groove was a bit loose, so I glued that crap down properly so it wouldn't squeak or buckle. The flooring is cheap as hell anyway. If anyone tries to pull it up again, it'll just crumble and split at the seams. The old Glacier Bay kitchen faucet from Home Depot, the $49 special, started leaking after I reinstalled it, so I decided to be generous to the new owners and replaced it with the exact same model, just at today's price of $60. The new one also dripped a bit, not much and only when it was turned on. I rewatched the move-in inspection video to refresh my memory and make sure everything looked exactly as it had originally. Even the tiny drywall holes were in the same spots. I also remembered the old oven had a blown control board and would shut itself off every 10 minutes. My wife and I even joked about leaving a hidden camera to capture the new owners' faces when they saw how faithfully we'd complied with the lease. But we moved out about a week before their scheduled move-in, and the risk of getting sued was, and still is, very real. So we decided not to push our luck. Intent is already half the crime. What happened next? I don't know. I ignored dozens of calls from both the landlord and the new owners. I sent them a registered letter with a copy of the lease, the move-in inspection video on DVD, and the 2020 email thread where the landlord explicitly approved the renovation on the condition that I restore everything to its original state. I did get one message from the realtor. "You're petty and vindictive. You're lucky you didn't get sued." Which, as far as I can tell, means the landlord did get sued, and someone had consulted a lawyer about whether they could go after me too, and the lawyers probably advised against it. The concierge recently told me no one has moved into the unit yet, which opens up another delightful possibility. By law, if tenants are evicted for owner occupancy, but the new owners don't actually move in within 6 months, I'm entitled to compensation. A full year's rent for a bad faith eviction. I still haven't bought anything. Unfortunately, I had to overpay to move one floor up in the same building, different layout, but thankfully much better finishes. I've set alerts on this building. If a trashed unit ever comes up for sale, I'll make an offer immediately. After all, I already have a kitchen that would fit perfectly.